We are into the month of August. We are into fall camp throughout the college football world. We are 21 days away from kicking off the college football season with Florida State and Georgia Tech. Just another 26 days until the Big Ten gets into action with Rutgers hosting Howard. So much fun here as we are now in the thick of it. Welcome, everybody, to Bleav in Big Ten. This is the Big Ten Show here with you on Sports Grid. Rhett Lewis alongside former Nebraska Cornhusker Adam Carricker, and we are ready to rock and roll here. Great to be here with you as we share our love of the Big Ten with you guys here today. Adam, but before we dig into everything that's going on, Fall camp brings about special memories for me, not because I pulled my hamstring on the first morning practice of every two-a-day in fall. Some might say that was strategy. Some might say that was genetics.
Strategy. Wow, that's brilliant. I should have thought of that.
I know, but I do love this time of year, man. I do get anxious. I think back about like my alarm clock going off. Don't want to miss it's just there's that excitement. Right? There's that nervous energy about getting this thing rolling and beginning this 2024 journey.
There's that nervousness. There's that excitement. There's that anticipation. I actually played with an individual, and I think Phil would be okay with me sharing this. Phil Peets, he slept with his lights on all night because he was so every day during fall camp, back when you could do two-a-days, like eons ago. But he was so nervous about being late. He'd sleep with his lights on all night. And I'm just like, Phil was an unusual guy, and I mean that in a phenomenal sense. He definitely caught me off guard the first time he ever blocked me. He pancaked me. But we won't talk too much about that. But, dude, it's a special time of year, and guys like you who pulled their hamstring out of nowhere, you were smarter than I was.
I was great in the afternoon practices for my gym. I needed like all day to get fully warmed up. You know what I mean? So, but look, that's what guys are going through right now. And while we're not doing double days anymore, there is still massive opportunities out there for teams to begin to come together, for players to begin to make their mark on the depth chart. We're going to get into some of that today. In fact, we're going to give you a de facto Ohio State and Michigan season preview, right? Talking about the defending national champions first with Michigan, talking about the defending Big Ten champions now back to back to back. And then, of course, Ohio State, who has been in that position very often. We're going to get their side of things as well. So Michigan, Ohio State previews coming up in our unofficial summer series kicking off today with you guys here on Sports Grid. But we also wanted to begin by trying to settle, maybe not once and for all, but settle the age-old debate, right? Big Ten versus SEC. In the first year of the new conference expansion, the new look SEC and Big Ten, SEC moving to 16 teams, Big Ten now with 18 teams for the first time this year. SEC welcoming Texas and Oklahoma, Big Ten welcoming USC, UCLA, Oregon, and Washington. So in light of that, you took a good hard look at the preseason top 25 polls here, Adam. And to set the scene there and to set the stage for this debate, give me an idea of how you feel like that shakes out, at least from a national perspective.
First of all, look at this glorious handwriting. I once got a C in the 5th grade from Mrs. LaSalle.
Looks like mine.
It's actually come a long ways because I can actually now read it. But I did. I went to Athlon Sports preseason top 25. I've waited for their magazine ever since I was a kid to come out every summer. Okay, so that's who I always go with because the actual AP poll doesn't come out until Monday, August 12th at noon. So we're going to go off of Athlon's preseason poll in the top 10. We'll just start with the top 5. You got number 1, Georgia, number 2, Ohio State, number 3, Oregon, number 4, Texas. Okay. SEC, Big Ten run amok. You go to the top 10. It doesn't change a whole lot as far as SEC versus Big Ten. Number 5, Ole Miss. Number 6, Bama. 7, Michigan. 8, Penn State. 9, Notre Dame out there doing their own thing as they always do. Number 10, Missouri. So that's 5 SEC, 4 Big Ten, and then Notre Dame right there in the Big Ten. And so, I'm sorry, not in the Big Ten, but kind of doing their own thing as always. And so number 11 is LSU. All right. And then you finally start to get into Florida State, Utah, Clemson, some of these Big 12 ACC teams. All right. You go through the top 25. You've got 9 SEC teams. Okay. All right. You got 5 Big 10 teams, very much in the top 10, top 4 is where the Big 10 teams tend to rest. Okay. Then you got 5 Big 12, 5 ACC, and Notre Dame. So the way I look at this is, wow, it's not even a question. It's the SE freaking C, right? It's 9 to 5 to 5. They got almost as many as the Big 10 and Big 12 combined. Okay, now that's the lazy man's way to look at it.
That's one way to look at it, right?
Okay, another way of looking at it is twofold. Number one, Oklahoma lost like their entire offensive line. They're number 16 in this poll, by the way. And they lost a whole bunch of players, not saying they're not going to be good, not going to be decent. I think they're going to have a rough introductory season to the SEC. That's just my opinion. I don't think they end up ranked. You look at A&M and all that turmoil. $100 million plus Jimbo Fisher is no longer there. The very next year, I mean, what can you really expect? So to me, is there a little bit of SEC, ESPN, SEC bias? I don't know.
Ooh, okay.
Yeah, I've said that before. I'll say it again. And I'll stand by it.
Second guy in a grassy knoll over here. I like it. This is good. The conspiracy theories. All right. Yep.
So I even put question marks by those two. If you can see those right there, question marks.
Yeah.
Now I did put some question marks by some Big Ten teams. All right. Okay. I didn't draw the question marks in, but Wisconsin and Iowa, they're ranked way more often than not, yet they don't appear in the top 25. Nebraska's kind of everybody's preseason darling. I don't know how you put them in the top 25 just yet, but they're kind of like everybody's preseason darling in the first 7 games or beyond manageable. And then I actually put a question mark to USC, whose preseason ranked 22nd. I'm like, how do we know what the heck to expect out of USC? So to me, you could insert Iowa, you can insert Wisconsin, you could take out USC. The one thing I will say the Big Ten has going for it is they are coast to coast. And over the course of time, that is going to benefit them greatly. The SEC, hey, the South, that's where football is king. It's God. It's right below going to church on Sundays or maybe even above in some spots, but it's very regional. Does that eventually over time make a difference?
So I think that's a good way to look at this. But, you know, the way that and especially from a national perspective to kind of get that picture, right? Yeah, all right, sure. SEC's got more teams in the top 25. That's fine. But when you directly compare pound for pound with the Big Ten, that's where things start to get interesting. Sure, the Big Ten has a couple extra teams, right? But I think we can use that, you know, we can kind of separate that from the ultimate kind of deciding factors here. But the way that I would kind of look at this is starting at the very top. Right, top 3 teams at each conference. I think we would both agree, and I think we did, right, on our when we were going through the polls and going through the preseason rankings back when we were live at Big Ten Media Days. You know, it's Ohio State, it's Oregon, it's Penn State. 1, 2, 3 at this point, right? And then, you know, Michigan probably in there for, you know, 4, depending on how you want to look at things, but they feel like that next, and then there's a little bit of a drop off there, right? We talked about those tiers on a previous episode. Be sure to check us out over on YouTube as well to catch up with all of that content if you missed it. So, and then when I compare those 3 teams, Ohio State, Oregon, Penn State, with the top 3 teams in the SEC preseason media poll, you're looking at Georgia, Texas, and Alabama. So Georgia and let's say Ohio State, right? If you stack that up, those top teams is pretty close to me in terms of talent. Now, I think the last couple of years, though, there's been a more established, consistent level of high-level elite success for Georgia. I'll give them the nod there, right? Oregon and Texas. Oregon, this close to the CFP a year ago. If not for Washington, they're probably in there. Washington, of course, defeated Texas in the semifinal. Quinn Ewers comes back for Texas, and now Dylan Gabriel leads the way for Oregon. Just from the quarterback spot there. But there's so, I mean, like, without going position by position here, I almost give that a little bit of a wash. Like, I think those 2 teams are really tight as well. And so then you look to Alabama and Penn State, you know, and there's obviously a lot of questions there as new staff turns over at Alabama, but some familiar faces, although quite a few of them have moved on. I kind of feel like it's pretty dang even there with Penn State and Alabama. So, I mean, like, it's really hard to separate those top 3 teams, right? I almost look at that as a wash. Like that is pretty tight right there with those 3 teams. So I don't think you can make the deciding factor on conference versus conference with those top 3 teams. Do you see it any differently there?
It's really hard. If I force myself to pick, I'd give the slight nod to Georgia over Ohio State.
So that's probably where they get the edge, right?
I would actually give the slight nod. So Texas, within the past year or two, maybe a tad above Oregon, but over the past decade, it's been Oregon. Texas was really down for a while, not that long ago. I'd actually give the slight nod to Oregon. Okay.
Yeah.
Just very slight. Penn State and Alabama. Dude. Yeah. I guess you give the slight nod to Bama if you have to pick one, just because Penn State hasn't quite been able to eke into that top tier. But Bama lost so many players. To me, it is a wash if you look at it like that.
Yeah, and then you're looking, Ole Miss, LSU versus, Michigan, Iowa. Again, you're going to be talking about 9 to 10 win teams right there. I do think, though, the bottom of the Big Ten, the perceived bottom of the Big Ten, ultimately gets the edge over the bottom of the SEC, which I think, in my opinion, the strength of the wolf is the pack, and in that case, I do feel like the Big Ten, top to bottom, is going to get there just a hair over the SEC, and that will likely cause a stir in that region there in the Southeast. But I'm okay with that, and I do think we could go more in depth on that. But I do feel like top, maybe SEC does get the edge, but from middle to bottom, I feel like the Big Ten can stand on its own 2 feet there and get the edge. So it's just a matter of how you want to parse it out that way. But that's always fun to kind of go through those 2 conferences. So all right, so that is yeah, go ahead.
I was just going to give the Big Ten the slight edge because of this. We play 9 conference games. They play 8. They get 2 bye weeks, and I don't like it. I don't like it.
Ring the bell. Raise the hand. Boom. We've got the champion right there. That's the kicker, the bonus. All right. We're giving the Big Ten the edge. Shocker here on the Big Ten show. All right. We're going to, when we come back here, we are going to dig into our summer series here, starting with the defending Big Ten champion, Michigan Wolverines. We'll give you some of their star power heading into this 2024 season. All right, Big Ten Show back here with you on Sports Grid. Rhett Lewis, Adam Carricker, as we dig into the first episode here, mini episode of our summer series, taking a look at the Michigan Wolverines. Going to try to identify some, to begin here, the star power with this team. Now, they lost quite a bit coming off their first national title since 1997. Talking about, quarterback, running back, both wide receivers. You're talking about offensive line completely gone from a year ago. Defensive stars leave as well. Junior Colson, kind of the heartbeat of that defense in the middle. Mikey Sainer still. So now how do they reload? And they're going to have to do it with the new head coach in Sharon Moore taking over for Jim Harbaugh. So let's start right there with star power. Adam, how do you see the crew that is going to lead this team back to prominence and to try to keep them in that contender conversation in the Big Ten Conference?
So you mentioned it. They sent 18 players to the NFL draft. That's the most of any team in college football last year. So entire offensive line plus 6 offensive linemen are gone, quarterback, head coach, everything that we already know. Star power, I'm going to start with Donovan Edwards. Going to shock you right there.
Perfect one.
I mean, his top end speed is probably even better than what they've had at their starting running back position for a while. So could it even be an upgrade over what they've had? That's almost hard to fathom, but he potentially could be. Then I'm going to go to the defensive side of the ball. Going to shock you there. Okay, with Michigan, especially with all the question marks on offense, you got defensive tackle Mason Graham. This is a guy who's already on the Nagurski watch list, along with cornerback Will Johnson. So those are the 3 players that kind of stick out to me the most. Okay, and Mason, first team All Big Ten. Okay, last year for the coaches. And I thought this was interesting. Third, how do you go from first to third team when it came to the media All Big Ten?
That was really weird. I remember that when that came out.
Yeah, those are the 3 that stood out to me.
Okay, I think that's there's no way you can't start with Donovan Edwards. I mean, that's just, he's on the cover of NCAA 25, right? The video game's back, and he's one of the dudes right there in the center leading the way. Has talked about his struggle with some kind of mental health issues, but feels like he is on the other side of that. Had some down production season from a year ago, but amped it up, in the college football playoff. We saw him really take off there. I think they get more explosive that way. To me, he's a more explosive runner than Blake Corum was, but you are going to miss Corum's nose for the end zone, which was unrivaled in Michigan history. Top touchdown scorer in that program's prestigious history. So certainly Donovan Edwards, I'll agree with you here. Mason Graham, flat out game wrecker. Like, he is a game wrecker from the interior. I think, even from a pass rush perspective, I think he's going to collapse pockets on quarterbacks and cause nightmares all day long. And then, I certainly Will Johnson, as you mentioned, one of the top corners in the country. We could be talking about Mason Graham and Will Johnson as potential top 5 draft picks.
For sure.
Like, that's how good they are on the defensive side of the ball. Yep. They're going to get some, kind of replacing both their starting linebackers, from last year. But they'll figure it out. They've got a great pipeline there. So my 2 stars that I'll give outside of the ones that you gave, Colston Loveland at tight end. I think, losing, Roman Wilson, who was a big time touchdown scorer for them a year ago. I think Colston Loveland picks up the fills that void a little bit on the offensive production. He was good last year. I think he takes another step this year. So Colston Loveland, star power on the offense for me. I'll flip over to the other side and give you another defender to watch, and that's Makari Page. Back there in the back end with Will Johnson. I think that they do a phenomenal job of limiting explosive plays. I think he's a sure tackler, and I think he's a guy that can be a playmaker from that spot. Gets his hands on the ball. There's a trust that's built there with him and Will Johnson. Like he can almost be like, I know Will's good over here. Maybe I could cheat over the other side. Like they've got, I feel like Makari Page is going to be one of those guys that gets his hands on a lot of footballs this season for Michigan. So a look there at star power. There's plenty of other ones that we could get to as well. Jayshawn Barham is a guy from Maryland that comes in to kind of help fill the void of the linebacker departures that they had a year ago. I'd keep an eye on him as well. But that kind of leads us into the next piece of this preview with Michigan, which is a breakout player. And so that's something that I want to get into right now. Do you have a guy, maybe outside of that star power tier that we've been talking about, that you think could take the next step for the Michigan Wolverines as they look to get back to the top of the conference?
One final thought. I forgot to mention it with Mason Graham. He was the defensive MVP of the Rose Bowl. He had that critical tackle for loss in overtime versus Bama as well. That's okay. Right. And it's interesting because it depends on where you want to put Colston Loveland. I had him as a breakout player. Now, it's kind of asinine to say because he was first team all Big Ten. Adam, how can he be a breakout player? Because star power means people recognize who you are very quickly. Right. Okay. And to me, he could become that recognizable star power typeface this year. I don't know that he's there just yet, despite being a really freaking good football player. First team all Big Ten last year to the coaches, second team all Big Ten in the media, caught 45 passes, 649 yards and 4 TDs. When you got a new quarterback, okay, a big target with great hands can be that new quarterback's best friend. So he could be their top pass catcher. Okay, I do have a couple of wide receivers on this list. They're all very unproven, but I've got Tyler Morris, Jr., 5'11", 185, very shifty as a potential breakout player. But I got Colston Loveland being that new quarterback's best friend, whoever that ends up being, whether it's Orgy or someone else early on in the season. And then again, another guy, like how is he on this list? And how is he not a star? Again, it's about that recognizable star power type name recognition. So defensive tackle Kenneth Grant. They could just have two monsters inside. All right, 29 tackles for loss. All right, 29 tackles, 5 for loss, 3.5 sacks, and 6 quarterback hurries. Second team and third team all Big Ten, respectively, coaches and media poll as well. So those are guys that could become more household type names this year.
Yeah. Okay. I'll give you 2 more. The first one is a tight end that will kind of help keep the tight end depth rolling for Michigan. You remember last year it was Colston Loveland, it was AJ Barner who had just transferred in, and then Max Bredesen, kind of doubles as a tight end fullback. They want to go, a little bit heavier. You bring Brady in there as a big force, a physical force on that Michigan offense. So I'll give you another one. Marlon Klein. Another tight end. He was a junior a year ago. Very limited production. 6'6", 250-pound guy. Guy was born in Germany. Okay, coming over. I think he starts to find his footing and be. I was tipped off to that by another great tight end in Michigan history, a Mackey Award winner. Jake Butt was like, keep an eye on Marlon Klein. So I trust his opinion very much. Shout out to Jake. And so I would keep an eye on him, kind of helping Marlon Klein, helping to add to that tight end room. And then the other one is Khalil Mullings, right? It was a guy who is, had over 200 yards rushing a year ago, but has kind of been in the shadows of Donovan Edwards and Blake Corum at times. And now, with the attention that Donovan's going to get, I think that Khalil Mullings could be a guy that really steps up as a breakout player to kind of help a 1-2 punch there in the Michigan backfield. Okay, just getting started with our Michigan previews. When we come back here, we're going to get now to the biggest question mark facing this Michigan Wolverines football team. And no question, that quarterback will be among those topics of conversation all coming up. All right, continuing our Michigan Summer Series season preview here on the Big Ten Show with you on Sports Grid. Rhett Lewis, Adam Carricker. So we've assessed the guys that we expect, right, to be big-time contributors for this Michigan team. Some that you may have heard of, some maybe you're just getting familiar with. But now for the first time in 2 years, we're going to have to be talking. We're going to talk about the Michigan Wolverines with a big time question mark. And I don't know how we can't start this piece of the conversation, biggest question mark facing the defending national champions, without talking about quarterback. Is that the biggest question mark for you at this point, Adam Carriker? And how do you see that battle?
Oh, it's by far the biggest question mark. I don't even know how one would, you could try to debate it. I don't know how one could do that successfully. When we didn't talk about star power and bring up the quarterback position, we didn't talk about breakout players and we didn't bring up the quarterback position. Well, the biggest question mark must be quarterback position. I think the odds-on favorite is Alex Orji, obviously young, underclassman. You got Jack Tuttle, which with more experience, played at Utah, Indiana. He's 25 years old. And I think it was you actually a couple of weeks ago that said, hey, maybe he starts out the season as a starter, especially with an early big-time game against a team like Texas. And maybe as the season progresses, you've got a package for Alex Orji, or maybe he wins the job right out the gate, who knows. But as the season goes along, maybe he starts to take over that offense as he gets some more time to develop. But the fact that we haven't talked about their quarterbacks at all to this point, de facto makes it the biggest question mark for Michigan.
Yeah, it's this is a tough one, right? Because for the last 2 years, and I think sometimes we forget that JJ McCarthy did not start the season 2 years ago when they made that first run of the college football playoff, right? It was Cade McNamara who started that first game, and then JJ jumped in the second week and never looked back. So there's been a consistency at quarterback for Michigan. Now they haven't been hugely productive in the pass game, certainly enough, right, to get the job done and win a national title. They had that formula, but I do think it's going to be interesting to see how Sharon Moore and how this offensive staff settles in on this decision, right? And I do think that the Sharon Moore piece of it is another contender for biggest question mark, right? Like how does he put his stamp on this team, right? How much of it is this still Harbaugh's formula, Harbaugh's philosophy? Where does Sharon Moore try to tweak things to make this team his, right? With his footprint, his impact. But yeah, I don't think there's any way you can look past the quarterback. Alex Orji, extreme athlete. We barely seen him throw the football, right? That's the thing. He came in some packages, ran the ball almost exclusively for Michigan when he was in there. So, the question is, how does the entirety of his skill set come to play here in this battle? And can they trust him both, in the pass game and the run game to, continue to lead this offense, not put them in bad positions, because this defense is going to keep opposing team scores low. Don't care who you are with how good they are, the type of players that they have. So, that's why I do kind of lean towards Jack Tuttle here because of the experience factor at quarterback. And I think he can help mitigate any issues offensively in terms of turnovers, in terms of putting the defense in a bad spot, to kind of keep scores low, to kind of, help the defense, kind of do their thing. And then successfully turn around, hand the ball off to Donovan Edwards, Kalel Mullings, get it out to Colston Loveland, methodically move this offense the way that they have in years past. So I think Tuttle early on, especially, Adam, might give them the edge there. And maybe it gives a little bit extra time for Orji if he needs a little bit more time to kind of ramp up his comfortability. So that's kind of how I see that too. As we get into the fall camp, who knows, right? Jack Tuttle's had an injury history as well. You got to factor that in, to this thing here too. And he didn't play really all the spring dealing with an injury recovery. So we'll kind of see how that plays out throughout fall. Most intriguing matchup here as we kind of wrap this part of the Michigan summer season preview. I mean, look, the last game in the regular season is always going to be popular on this list. Anything else that piques your interest?
Well, final thought on the quarterback battle. I remember 2 years ago, Harbaugh said McNamara is going to start game one, and then McCarthy is going to start game two and we'll make a decision. Well, game two this year is Texas, so you can't do that. And you make a great point. Their defense is going to keep them in games. They just can't have big-time negative plays on the offensive side of the ball, and you will be in games and have an opportunity to win. So I'm not going to pick Ohio State for most intriguing matchup just because I'm just not going to. So my most intriguing matchup, I was tempted to pick Washington. I think Washington's going to struggle. Okay. So I look at most intriguing matchup and I'm going to go with Oregon in Ann Arbor. Okay. It's later in the season. It's in November. Who knows what the weather could be like. So I'm going to go with Oregon because I could see Alex Orji hitting his stride at that point in time, Michigan hitting their stride, and maybe a potential upset game as the Ducks come to Ann Arbor.
I like that one a lot. I'm going to go with USC in the 4th game of the season for Michigan. Also coming to Ann Arbor. There's a little bit of history, right, with that matchup, with that rivalry. We rekindle that a little bit in this new Big Ten. So I think Michigan USC could have some fireworks, certainly with 2 teams there, kind of looking to make their mark, maybe coming from a little bit of the under the radar in terms of not being in that top tier of the conference going in. So I think that could be, that could kind of set up either one of those teams' trajectories upward, as they get into the meat of conference play beyond that. All right, we're going to get back to Michigan by discussing high-low ranges for their win totals coming up a little bit later in the show. But when we come back, we're going to dig into Ohio State as they look to get back on the top of this conference. We'll have that for you and the beginning of their summer season preview when we come back. Okay, continuing our summer series season previews here as we're back with you on Sports Grid. This is the Big Ten show. We do believe in Big Ten, and the Ohio State Buckeyes are a big reason why. Major influx of talent, retained a lot of talent from an 11-2 team a year ago. So as we approach this season, I think you'd be hard-pressed to find a team on paper more talented than the Ohio State Buckeyes, and that is not a hot take. That is clear and obvious if you look up and down this roster. So as we assess star power here, Adam Carricker, how do you see it to begin?
Well, it's not a short list. We discussed that a minute ago off air. So, I mean, I'm going to go a little bit quicker just because there is more names, and I know you got some names of your own. Wide receiver Emeka Egbuka could have gone to the draft. He's back. I do want to point out real quick that Ohio State's actually tied with Alabama and USC for second most players on the 2024 preseason Outland Trophy watch list. Georgia has the most. All right, but they've got offensive tackle Josh Fryer, guard Donovan Jackson, who I don't think's been talked about enough. This guy was a 5-star it's because he's a guard. They just don't get the publicity that a tackle does or otherwise. But a 5-star out of high school, 2-time All-Big Ten performer coming back for his senior season. You got defensive tackle Tyleik Williams. Okay, all those players are on the Outland Trophy watch list. You got defensive end Jack Sawyer. This is a guy who had 5 sacks in the final 3 games of the season a year ago, 3 sacks in the bowl game versus Ole Miss in the Cotton Bowl as well. And there are some folks, myself included, who could see him being the highest drafted defensive lineman to come out of Ohio State since Chase Young went number 2 overall in 2020, potentially. Okay, it's and this is meant as just a broad observation, not a dig at Jack, because I don't know how he's going to do this year. But it's not hard to be great for a short game stretch. The question is when you're going into your potentially his last season, and everybody knows you're coming, and everybody's going to game plan for you, and you're going to get chipped by backs, and you got tight ends, and they're going to slide to your side, and they're going to do all these things. Now, he's not the only guy you got to block on that line. So you can't just focus solely on him. But can you do it when everyone knows you're coming, and can you be consistent the entire year? That's the big question mark there. All right, cornerback, you got Denzel Burke. Defensive end, and I have practiced this name so much, JT Tuimoloau. I can't say it right. You say it.
Tuimoloau.
Yes,
Tuimoloau.
I know how to say it.
Yeah, there it is.
I know how to say it. It just won't come out right. Okay.
Rolls off the tongue, right?
Like when people say car Riker or character, it's like, all right, get over it. Right. And I don't know, this guy named Caleb Downs who came from Alabama, if you ever heard of him. So those, I tried to go quickly. Who do you got? Did I miss some folks?
I mean, no, I think you hit it pretty good there. I would say, this Ohio State team, though, has the best running back room in all of college football.
Oh, my gosh. How'd I miss those two? Yeah, go.
Well, no, you were just being kind to me by allowing me to wax poetic here about Travion Henderson and Quinshon Judkins, who comes in from Ole Miss, coming in with back-to-back 1,000-yard seasons in his first 2 years there with Ole Miss. So, and then Travion, who kind of took the conference by storm his freshman year and became an incredible name to watch moving forward, and then has had some injuries and some ups and downs each of the last 2 seasons that has kind of limited his production in a way that did not meet expectation after that first year. But now he returns, obviously could have gone to the draft, was eligible, could have done that. And then he gets a guy like Quinshon Judkins to come in. And I think this is going to be the best run game in college football this year. Like, maybe they're not going to run it as frequently as we saw, let's say, a Michigan did a year ago. And, we're not going to see them out here, running the triple option, like Army or Navy, but
that'd be awesome.
They probably could.
That'd be awesome.
With how good these dudes are. So, and by the way, Will Howard, the quarterback here,
Yep.
with a physicality to his game, I think you actually might see a little bit of option game there, but not in the way that you're used to with the service academies. So yeah, I think that run game is kind of a game changer this year. For the Ohio State Buckeyes, especially as you break in a new quarterback here. We know how Chip Kelly does like to pound the rock that way. And if he's got some tempo with the way that he wants to run the offense too, I think you're going to start to capitalize on the fatigue of the opposing defense there by wearing them down, by leaning on them with these two running backs that way. So clearly, that's obviously a big piece of the story here for the Ohio State Buckeyes. I think the offensive line, I'm excited about where they're at. You mentioned Donovan Jackson. I think Josh Simmons getting Seth McLaughlin to come in from Alabama. He's obviously played in some big games down in Tuscaloosa. So I think they've got that. Their coach, Justin Fry, I think is one of the best offensive line coaches in college football. A little bit under the radar there. Keep that in mind as well. And then the coaching in general is star power. Okay. Ryan Day, Chip Kelly, Brian Hartline. I mentioned Justin Fry. Like on the offensive side of the ball, and Will Howard told this, to me this summer, he is so fired up to get coached by these guys that have such a great feel for this system and the way they want to attack defenses. So I for sure think that that star power on offense is huge. You mentioned Caleb Downs, clearly, perhaps biggest impact transfer of anybody at any team at any position coming in from Alabama with what he did as a true freshman. JT Tuimoloau, Jack Sawyer coming off the edge, big time. I would also keep an eye out for Sonny Styles, who makes the kind of full-time transition from kind of that hybrid safety slot nickel type of linebacker role to I'm trying to replace Tommy Eichenberg here. And that dude is phenomenally athletic. I could not believe that he was lining up in the defensive backfield with how flipping big he is to begin with. So, and you mentioned, some of the other stars, Tyleik Williams is obviously one. Denzel Burke, the fact that they were able to keep him out of the draft, the guy who, when the season started was considered a first round pick type of talent, and then they get him back. So incredible job done from the Ohio State recruiting staff to keep their stars as much as they possibly could, and then to go out there and recruit some new ones, highlighted by Will Howard, Quinshon Judkins, and Caleb Downs. So that's star power, right? And look, there's more. And I think we should probably, and I'll get to you here in just a second. And you mentioned, Emeka Buka, obviously the wide receivers, that is clear. But talking about the way that the Ohio State Buckeyes are able to recruit young receivers, there has been a young man that is clearly generating a lot of hype at the wide receiver spot in Columbus. So Jeremiah Smith is going to be a guy who you're going to hear early and often, and is probably already considered star power category.
That's a great point. I was just going to say that running back room is the most talented, best running back room in the country. And I don't think any team in the country benefited from Nick Saban retiring more than Ohio State.
Yes.
Okay. Yeah. From Caleb Downs to offensive linemen that came in. And then you got Chip Kelly, who was obviously UCLA's head coach, a lot of coaching experience. I'm excited to see what he does with the mobile Will Howard, the physical running style that he can bring. He's obviously got to be able to throw the ball for them to be successful against the top tier teams in the country. But I'm excited to see a little read option, a little up tempo, to see what he can do as well. When you talk about breakout players.
Yeah. What do you got?
How do you not bring up Jeremiah Smith? 6'3", 215 from Miami. I mean, the dude's a freak. He looks like he's a senior already. So keep your eye out for him. Obviously, Carnell Tate right now, a wide receiver, is probably the favorite to be the number 2 target, depending on what happens with Jeremiah Smith. Right behind Emeka Buka. So keep your eye on him as well. And then I'm actually going to bring up the quarterback, unlike what we did with Michigan, Will Howard. He not only is someone to keep your eye on, he needs to be a breakout player for Ohio State, and for them to potentially beat a team like Georgia, who may be the one team in the country, not maybe, but is the one team in the country that can match them talent-wise. Okay, so those are my breakout players, and we'll see what happens. Potential breakout players.
I think that's a great one, and those are some good ones. I'll give you one more, because I think Caleb Downs has really rightfully so, has stolen the spotlight in that Ohio State secondary, and he hadn't even played a game yet in Columbus. Now they did lose, Josh Proctor, who in his final year at Ohio State really showed that potential that people really thought he was going to have, the entirety of his career, coming in as a super highly recruited dude. So they did lose a lot in the secondary in terms of the safety spot with Styles then transferring or transitioning down to linebacker. Proctor gone. Lathan Ransom, they lost kind of halfway through the season last year. He comes back, which is great news. My breakout player is a guy to keep in mind, because we've seen Jim Knowles use multiple safety type personnel groupings there where you can get 3 of them on the field at a time. Malik Hartford is a guy to watch. A true sophomore, played a little bit as a true freshman, was getting some rave reviews out of training camp as a true freshman. I mean, like Jim Knowles was saying, like, I have never seen a true freshman come in here with the type of football IQ, the type of awareness and playmaking ability from that spot, because he puts a lot on those safeties in that style defense. So I think Malik Hartford, who was even further under the radar because he was dealing with an injury recovery during spring practice, again starts to reinsert his name into the conversation here in the fall. And I mean, just look at this defense top to bottom, and there's just so much talent that, we could go up and down with breakout players, but I would say keep an eye on Malik Hartford. Okay. There's certainly question marks though. Even with the very top teams in this conference, Ohio State obviously being one of them. What is the biggest question mark for these Buckeyes, and what is their most intriguing matchup on the schedule? We get into that when we come back here on Sports Grid. All right, the unquestioned top team in this conference, Ohio State, still under the microscope as we continue our summer series season preview here with the Buckeyes on Sports Grid here at the Big Ten Show. Adam, as you look at question marks, though, surrounding this team, how do you see it? Because I think there's kind of a couple of ways you can look at this. You can look at personnel. You can also look at seasons past, right, in terms of success. And then, how do they deal with the influx of new schools and new talent coming into this conference? So how do you see the biggest question mark for this Ohio State Buckeyes coming into this into this season?
So I got a 3-part answer, because I did look at it from a personnel standpoint. There's really only one question mark, and he's uber talented. He's more than capable of doing the job, and that's Will Howard. The question isn't running. The question is handling the big stage, handling the pressure, handling the eyeballs. A guy who did lose his job at K-State a year ago, albeit to a very good young quarterback in his own right as well. But now there's going to be so much more scrutiny. How do you handle that? Also, throwing the ball. Okay. How well can you throw the ball to keep these defenses off balance, especially teams like Penn State, one of the best defenses in the country, Michigan, one of the best defenses in the country, and some of the other teams you're going to face as well, including Oregon in Autzen Stadium about halfway through the season. So how does he handle the big stage? How does he handle the scrutiny? Because it's a whole different level, okay, when all eyeballs are on you. And then throwing the ball consistently, okay, not making the big mistake, kind of like what we talked about with Michigan. They really need to avoid that. Right. And then it was interesting, and it's hard to argue when you said Ryan Day was a star, because he's very recognizable, okay? Yeah. But there are a lot of people, and I'm not even saying it's a bad thing, and I have fallen this camp, and I don't see it as a bad thing, but he was born on third base at Ohio State, okay? Oh, yeah. He was born on third base.
Pulling a Jim Harbaugh on us here.
He was.
Thought he hit a triple, okay.
But why is that a bad thing? I didn't say it was a bad thing. I just said it was a true thing, right. Okay?
That's right.
I didn't say it was a good thing either. I just said it is what it is. You inherited a program that was doing very, very well under Urban Meyer. You have not been able to get home yet. Part of that is Michigan's been really freaking good. Harbaugh's a pretty good coach in his own right. So to be fair, there's a level of competition there that he has to get over that hurdle now. Okay, and this is his year, so to speak. They went all in on the transfer portal, all in on personnel. The schedule is not brutal. Most people would consider like Michigan's schedule to be easily one of the top 10 toughest schedules in the country. I would not put Ohio State in that realm of toughest schedules in the country. Their non-conference, for example, is Akron, Western Michigan, Marshall. With all due respect to those football programs, it's not the same thing as even Fresno State, Arkansas State, which are very good G5 teams, and then freaking Texas coming into your house. So to me, Ryan Day, he's a very recognizable figure. Calling him a star, I'm cool with that, but he's got to get the job done, and this is the year. So the pressure, how does he handle the pressure and getting over the hump as a team, as a coach and a coaching staff? Also, physicality. Now, I don't know that Michigan's not, I don't think Michigan, if Michigan shoves them around this year like they have in previous years, they got real issues. Yeah. Okay. I don't see that happening. Okay. Because Michigan can't threaten them enough in other areas, at least not from what I see at this point. But they've been pushed around at times. And they got to show that they can be physical, and they got to show that they can at least match certain teams. And then Ryan Day and Chip Kelly, do your wizardry thing with the schematics, let your talent take over, okay, and do your thing. But they can't go getting pushed around, mostly by Michigan, okay, or even in the CFP. You're going to face some of these other teams that you have not played week in and week out. Once you get to the CFP, you got like 2, 3, 4 potential playoff games here where you got to show up week in and week out, and they haven't had to do that before. So to me, those are the biggest question marks.
I think, yeah, you hit the nail on the head there. The expectations, right?
Mm-hmm.
Understanding them, living up to them, and perhaps exceeding them is kind of, how I view the 3-prong biggest question for this Ohio State football team. What I loved, though, is that they began to provide the answer at Big Ten Media Days. I mean, Ryan Day stood up there and said, I know we have to win them all, and we are ready for that. And that's what this offseason has been about for them within the transfer portal, in high school recruiting, getting this roster not only to have star power, at all 22 in terms of offense, defense starters, but to have competition within those groups at an extremely high level. Like, you're not satisfied with saying Travion Henderson is a dude at running back and he's going to be our guy, and I feel great about that. It's like, well, he might be our guy, but we got an opportunity to bring in, one of the best running backs in this country to supplement this room. Mm-hmm. And Quinshon Judkins. I think the embracing of competition here within the personnel groupings and the position groups for this Ohio State team helps us answer that biggest question for them, which is, do they beat Michigan? Can they get back to a Big Ten title? And is this a national championship caliber team, right? I think on paper, the answer to that question is unequivocally yes.
Mm-hmm.
But then the second piece of that is, okay, this is a team that hasn't done that the last 3 years. So what do they need to do to flip that, to get over that hump? Well, on paper is the start. In practice is how they earn it, right? And I think Ryan Day, from what I understand, talking to Will Howard, he was almost taken aback at the accountability that Ryan Day demands day in, day out, rep in, rep out, not only from his offensive players, but from this team. And so he understands better than anybody the pressure and the expectations he is under. So I think they are well equipped to answer, but that is without doubt the biggest question, right? It's kind of like an existential thing
for
with
sure.
Ohio State, because it's not X's and O's. It's not Jimmy's and Joe's. It's how does this team come together to rise above some of the negativity, even though they won 11 games. So that's kind of how I see that. All right, let's hit quickly here on the most intriguing matchup that you see. Kind of similar situation when we were doing that with Michigan, right? Obviously, it can be the game at the end of the season. Anything else that piques your interest here?
So, by the way, here we are on the Big Ten show, and neither one of us picked Ohio State as Michigan's most intriguing game. It was almost like we were just making a point.
Given, right?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So I look at Ohio State's schedule, so I'm not going to pick Michigan. Okay. So the next games that stand out to me, immediately my eyes went to Oregon in Eugene. I'm not going to pick that game because I fully anticipate them playing a rematch in the Big Ten title game. So if I'm not going to pick that game up in Happy Valley, November 2nd, Penn State. If Penn State is going to get the monkey off of Coach Franklin's back, they got to win that game. So I got Happy Valley, Penn State, November 2nd.
Damn. Good one. I'm going to take the low-hanging fruit and go Oregon on that one because this, remember Oregon came into Columbus and won a couple of years ago.
That's
right?
true.
And so now with Ohio State taking this talented team out to Autzen Stadium in Eugene, I think that is a massive matchup, as of the new Big Ten, arguably the biggest matchup of the new Big Ten this year. I do think, though, that playing Iowa the week before helps refocus this team, helps recalibrate this team after non-conference games against, Marshall, Western Michigan, and Akron, lesser opponents. And they got Michigan State too to open conference play. But I think that matchup against a potential 10-win team in Iowa could really benefit Ohio State as they go out to Oregon. Okay. With that, it's time to get to win totals, digging deeper into this schedule for both Ohio State and Michigan. High-low ranges of wins for both of these teams when we come back. Bleav in the Big Ten. Back here with you on Sports Grid. Rhett Lewis, Adam Carricker, as we wrap up this edition here, putting Michigan, Ohio State back in focus by looking at win totals. And that's what we want to do here. We want to set a high-low bar for these two teams in terms of their ultimate success this season. Let's start with Michigan. And as you assess their schedule here, as you mentioned, the non-conference definitely has a big piece, a big moment right there. Week 2 against Texas could set them up for the conference schedule. Let's give me a high number, most wins you think this schedule could produce for Michigan, and then a low end number for the Wolverines. How do you see it?
All right, so on the high end, all right, they start 2-0 against Fresno and Texas, and 3-0 and 4-0, and they beat USC, Arkansas State, Minnesota, Washington, Illinois, Michigan State. They're 8-0.
Undefeated. Okay?
Yeah. This is the high end, all right? Yeah. I don't think they beat Oregon. They beat Indiana. They beat Northwestern. I don't see them beating Ohio State. So high end, 10-2.
Okay, high end 10-2. I think at this point, kind of the only alternate theory there is saying that they are better than expected in their rebuild under Sharon Moore. And I do think 11 wins is the high bar. I think they will stumble against either Oregon, Ohio, or Ohio State. I think it's going to be really hard for them to sweep those two powerhouses with this team, with the newcomer at quarterback and all that. So I'm going to say on the high end, I'll give them 11 if they get by either Oregon or Ohio State. And in that case, you're talking about an obvious college football playoff team, which would be huge in Sharon Moore's first year. Okay, now, though, let's look at the low end in terms of win totals here. How do you see that?
All right, let's make some enemies in Ann Arbor, shall we? Let's go.
Yeah, right. Is it a bowl Fresno team? State. Is this a 6-win team?
Dude, 6-6 is my low bar.
Is it really? Yeah.
Fresno State out the gate gets them. Just early on, rebuild, new quarterback. Yeah. Fresno State should not be overlooked. Texas obviously comes in and wins in this scenario, so they start off 0-2. Beat Arkansas State, lose to USC, and they're 1-3 out the gate. Then you beat Minnesota 2-3. I'll have them beating Washington. I just think Washington's really going to struggle. 3-3, Illinois 4-3, Michigan State. That could go either way. In this scenario, I'm going to go they lose, so they're 4-4. Then they lose to Oregon 4-5, beat Indiana, beat Northwestern, lose to Ohio State. If my math is correct, I believe that's 6-6.
Okay,
told you. Let's make some enemies.
That is 6-6. That is well under. That is well under the, I don't know, let's call it somewhat consensus win total projections, depending on who you follow out there, sitting right around 9 wins for this Michigan team. And I'm going to go under that as well. And I'm going to say that the low bar for me, because I do believe in continuity, and I do believe there is some of that in that transition from Jim Harbaugh to Sharon Moore, I'm going to give them 8. I'm going to say that Texas, Oregon, and Ohio State are those 3 teams that forces the Wolverines to stumble. And so I think they have the ability to get past everyone else on their schedule with that run game in particular in that defense. So my low bar is 8. My high bar is 11. Your high bar was 10. Your low was 6. So we're not too far off there, but there does seem to be some volatility in how this Michigan team could look. Let's move to Ohio State. High win total for you with the Buckeyes.
Well, you officially have
12,
more friends. Right? Yeah. Well, yes, you officially have more friends in Ann Arbor than I do now.
A little bit.
Ohio State, I mean, it's 12-0. They just beat everybody. That's the high bar. So the low bar for me, I'll just go ahead and do it, is 9-3 with losses. And this is the low bar, I might add. Oregon, Penn State on the road, and Michigan somehow comes in there and beats them. That's the low bar for me, is 9-3.
Yeah, and I would say as well, again, the projections for Ohio State sit, again, depending on where you look, at around 10.5. I think they're above that, almost no matter what to me. Yeah. So I say kind of the high bar again, 12-0 clear. That's the projection there for me. And then the low bar, I don't see them losing 2 games this year. I don't. And so to me, I think the low bar is 11. I think if they stumble out of the gate at Oregon, they get refocused pretty quickly and they run through this thing. They've owned Penn State in the way that Michigan has owned them the last 3 years. So I don't know that is going to be a stumbling block. You do look at Michigan, but they get them in Columbus this year. To me, high is 12, low is 11. Damn good season for Ryan Day and Columbus coming up here. And so I think that they are in the college football playoff almost irregardless of this schedule this year. And then who knows? Who knows what happens, right? Because it's a real playoff here this year with 12 teams. All right, it's August, the first week of August. So why not pick the last game of the regular season? It's Ohio State. It just
makes so much sense, right?
Yeah. This is perfect. Ohio State and Michigan. Quickly here, under a minute. Give me your winner of the game this season.
So I'm actually going to predict my win total for both teams, and in that will be the winner of the game. I got Michigan going 9-3, beating everybody except for Texas, Oregon, and Ohio State. I have Ohio State going 11-1, losing at Oregon, but beating them in the Big Ten title game.
That's awesome. I do believe that Ohio State gets back on track this year. And my projection for them is they go 12-0. I do believe that they have the ability to go undefeated here, and they will beat Michigan in the game. I do think if I was going to give you my full-on projection for Michigan, I think they find a way to win at least one of those three big games that we're talking about. I think that's still a 10-win Michigan football team. And we could very well see, depending on how Oregon does, we could very well see a rematch of the game in the Big Ten championship.
Who wins that game? Who you got winning that game?
It's Ohio State again. Ohio State sweeps them in back-to-back weeks. Okay?
I do think both teams reach the CFP this year.
I agree. I think you're getting 4 from the Big Ten. I think it's Oregon, Penn State. I think it's Ohio State, and I think Michigan is right there as well. So there we go. That's it. That's our debut run here on Sports Grid. Thanks for being with us here on the Big Ten Show. For Adam Carricker, I am Rhett Lewis. We'll be back with you next week.